Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to my presentation on the otherworldly art of Edgar Allan Poe. Let's just get into it. So, who is Edgar Allan Poe? Edgar Allan Poe was an American short story writer, poet, critic, and editor who is famous for his cultivation of mystery and grotesquely natured things. He is also considered to be a central figure of Romanticism in the United States. Now, to relate him to maybe someone that we've covered in class, that would be Nathaniel Hawthorne. He is also considered to be one of the prominent figures in things such as dark romanticism. So I basically set up a timeline to describe Poe's life. I felt like it was important to give a sort of like historical context and background to who he was while he was going through his life, and not just, oh, let's analyze a bit of his pieces. Let's also analyze, how his life was. So to start, he was born in 1809 in Boston. And right after he was born, sadly, his father did desert him and his family. In 1811, his mother dies at 24, and his biological father dies soon after at age 27. Both of his parents actually ended up being actresses. Poe is then adopted by the Allan family. In 1815, the Allan family moves to England, and in England, Poe was able to attend very good schools. However, in 1820, the tobacco market forces them to move back to Richmond. Because of this, hostilities do form between Poe and his foster father. And although his father, sorry, not his father, but his foster father had inherited a large amount of wealth from his uncle, in 1826, Poe attends the University of Virginia, but regardless of the wealth that his foster father had inherited, he refuses to give large amounts of financial support. So Poe ends up not finishing his first year because of his debt, and because of this, Poe got into gambling and drinking. So not only did he have problems with, sobriety, but he was trying to gamble his way out of debt, but in return actually gambled his way further into debt. And that resulted in close to $2,000 worth lost, which can be estimated to about $30,000 in today's value. In 1827, Poe's foster father kicks him out at 18. And in 1827, Poe ends up paying for a printing of Tamerlane and other poems by a Bostonian. Um, all while this is happening, once his father kicks him out, because of his large amount of debt and poverty and basically not being able to support himself, he goes into the army. Um, Now, during this release of Tamerlane and the other poems by a Bostonian, um, Poe now changed his name to Edgar A. Perry, and he is then released from the army as a sergeant major. But because of his release, Poe now needed his father's influence to get into West Point. In 1829, his second volume, Al Araf, I believe I'm saying that correctly, I'm not sure, but Tamerlane and minor poems are published in Baltimore. Although the review was small and pretty straight to the point, it was very favorable. In 1830, Poe is admitted to West Point. During this time, all of his, I wouldn't say colleagues, but actually, yeah, colleagues, knew Poe as being good with French and mathematics. To fast forward, in 1831, Poe's foster father remarries and has a son. During this time, Poe was very adamant that he was going to get his foster father's wealth once he passed away, or at least was in the will. However, as we see later on, well, actually, yeah, as we see later on, his foster father dies in 1834, and Poe isn't in the will at all. Poe then realizes that West Point isn't for him and tries to get out. To get kicked out, he is successful in doing so. He does this by skipping classes, in not doing things how he should. Um, and in January 1834, he had a significant breakthrough by publishing his tale, The Visionary, in Godey's Lady's Book. And this Godey's Lady's Book was edited by Sarah J. Hale, who was for many years the nation's most prominent woman. This is important because his work is now recognized through someone who has influence amongst, society. So obviously, because she was popular and she was the nation's most prominent woman, this was very good for him. In 1835, Poe becomes Thomas W. White's editorial assistant. And because of this, he is able to move back to Richmond. In 1836, Poe marries Virginia Clem, who, taboo enough, is his cousin, and she is only 13. So, you know, a, a bit of a weird spot there, but, we are in the 1830s. So anyway, then on to 1837, White ends up firing Poe due to his relapse with drinking, and they end up clashing with day-to-day operations, so simple things or over projects or over edits. And Poe, obviously results back to drinking when he was a little bit sober during a small period of time. In 1837, Poe moves to Philadelphia, where, despite extreme poverty, continues to write. In 1839, Poe gets his first steady job as a co-editor of Burton's Gentleman's Magazine. However, a year later, Poe gets fired again for drinking, but he is recommended to work for George Graham, who bought out Burton's. In 1844, Poe again moved his family to New York City, working as an editor at the New York Evening Mirror. The Raven, which is considered to be his most popular piece, appeared in the February American Review after advanced publication in the New York Evening Mirror. So this is when, in 1844, it does say 1845, I believe, if you look up its publication. However, between 1844 and 1845, his most popular piece does appear. In 1847, Virginia Clem dies of tuberculosis, while Poe was also seriously ill. In 1848, Poe proposes to Sarah Helen Whitman. However, she denies his original proposal, but then later on agrees to it in December. But then they ultimately just break off the relationship soon after. In 1849, Poe gets engaged to Elmira Royster Shelton, a widow he had known in his childhood. However, 1849 is also the year that Edgar Allan Poe passes, and on October 3rd, 1849, Poe is found senseless near a polling place on Election Day. They take him to the hospital, and a few days later, October 7th, 1849, he dies in the hospital due to the congestion of the brain. So that concludes my timeline. So we're going to move on. I have a bit of an analysis, but more of a discussion, not very formal, but more of like we're having a conversation, where I took passages from the Raven that I would like to explain. So, passage number 1. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was only unbroken, and the darkness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, Lenore. This I whispered, and echo murmured back the word, Lenore, merely this and nothing more. So anyone who is not familiar with the Raven, let me give a little bit of a backstory. I couldn't fit all of the Raven in here because I felt that it was although it's a short story, it's a very long short story to have to fit into a slide. So I basically just chose important passages that I believed I could elaborate on. But basically, the Raven is about the main character, the narrator, who recently has a loss in his life of Lenore, who can be assumed to be his wife or his lover, whoever. And this first passage really talks about how dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. So basically, the main character is in this sort of denial that Lenore is completely gone because there's things that happen, where he hears something at the door or he hears something outside, and he's like, oh, in the back of his head, it could be Lenore, but then he follows up with saying, oh, it's just this and nothing more. So we can see in the character that he has this sort of hope in the back of his head that, Lenore could still be out there somewhere, when in reality, that's just not the case. Um, that's why it says, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, Lenore. This I whispered, and echo murmured back the word, Lenore. Merely this and nothing more. So he's in this mindset that, Lenore could be out there. There's a possibility that maybe she's come back, but, no mortal would ever dare to dream that someone can just come back from the dead and knock on the door and everything's fine. So to move on into passage 2, wondering at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken. Doubtless, said I, what it utters, sorry, error, but what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster. So, when hope he could adjure, stern despair returned instead of the sweet hope he dared adjure. That sad answer, nevermore. So this poem to me kind of follows with that same idea and theme that I had about, um, in the back of his head having this hope. And it's almost like, I could be slightly wrong with this, but it's almost like he is personifying these things such as disaster and hope, because I notice they're capitalized. So I don't know if he is trying to, with disaster, hope, despair, give it this personification and a place in his life. Um, so to move on, passage 3, prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden if, within the distant Eden, it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore, quoth the raven, nevermore. So, from what I took from this passage is basically he's having this internal fight with, where Lenore is, and if she's in, heaven or, above with God, um, if he could maybe have like end up seeing her, but tell the soul with sorrow laden, his soul is sorrowful, with distant Eden. So I believe this Eden is referring back to Eden, which, if you don't know what Eden is, it's the Garden of Eden from the Bible and God and everything. Um, so I think he's just relating, Lenore being with the angels, but the raven is saying nevermore. So more of like a, yes, Lenore is a place where it is unattainable for you to ever see her again. So on to the fourth passage. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon that is dreaming, and the lamp light over him streaming throws a shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. I believe this is the last stanza of The Raven. Let me just double check. Yep. And this is just where he, in a stanza before this, he is almost arguing with the raven that's sitting outside his window and throwing a fit, like, how could this be? How can Lenore be gone? And then it goes into this to where the raven's just sitting and sitting, and there's a shadow on his floor, and his soul lays also with that shadow. and it can't be lifted. I took this last passage as he maybe not has come to terms, but is very aware that he will never be connected to Lenore physically or spiritually ever again, because the Raven keeps quoting nevermore, nevermore, and that's the only thing it says. But the narrator is literally taking what he says nevermore as a response to, am I ever going to see Lenore again? Is this hope, a thing? Is Lenore this? Is it that? And the Raven's just saying nevermore. So basically, the main character is realizing he will never be connected to Lenore ever again. So then let's move on. In the end, I'm going to connect these all to what we're learning in class now. So bear with me on a little clarification. The next short story I chose was The Telltale Heart, which was published in 1843. And here's my first passage. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am, but why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken, and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. So this is the opening stanza of The Telltale Heart, and it's very interesting, and you should remember how he is not only trying to convince the reader, but almost like himself that, he is not insane, he's not mad. There's no sense of insanity here. He is very calculated in what he's doing, and he knows what he's doing, and he's very aware. And the only thing that may be considered a bit off about, the story in him is just his sense of hearing and how it's maybe like hypersensitized. And this comes into play way later in the short story. And I talk about that later on. So let's go to the next passage. Passage 2. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object, there was none. Passion, there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me an insult. For his gold I have no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so, by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. This passage I found was very important because a main theme or concept of The Telltale Heart is the distinction that the main character is very aware that it's not the old man. Like, he actually loves the old man. He enjoys the old man. He enjoys conversating with the old man. And it's not even his gold. It's no material thing, but it's because of this eye that he has that he just feels is almost a separate thing from the actual old man. There's the old man, and then there's this eye. It seems the main character never puts these two together. It's never the old man with this eye. It's just the eye or the old man. And because of this pale blue eye, he is just thrown into a world of where he can basically justify his action of murdering an old man simply because of this feeling he has about his eye, which is for the 1840s. It's quite interesting because this isn't this question of morality and the question of how can you hurt the ones you love doesn't really become like this huge talked about thing until Sigmund Freud, I believe. So it's very interesting to see Poe conceptualize this and show that, you can love someone, but you can still hurt them and wrong them. So on to the next passage. Passage number 3 is, I undid the lantern cautiously, oh so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight, but I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. So this is still carrying over the point that it's not the old man, it really is his eye, and that the main character seems to have this really internalized and not basically outward, because he speaks to the old man and everything, but an internal struggle with what this eye means to him personally and how it is personally wronging him, and how everything will be so much better for the old man and him if they just rid the eye altogether and just rid the old man. So um in this specific passage, he had been watching the old man at midnight for many nights, um, waiting to see if he could see the vulture eye, because if he doesn't, then he can't do the act, because he's not physically seeing this thing that's bothering him. He's not having that fury and anger boil up inside of him, because it's the thing that he wants to destroy isn't technically there because his eyes are closed, which is also interesting. And it still falls into, it's like he humanizes the old man when the eye is not in play and you can't see it, but dehumanizes the old man once his eye is in play and it's open. Passage number 4 is, it was open wide, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones, but I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct precisely upon the damned spot. And now, have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over acuteness of the senses? Now I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. So again, another continuation of what this eye means to him personally. And he now, although, the ray of light is falling upon his eye, he physically, literally doesn't see anything else but the eye, but also figuratively, he can't see past the eye. He can't see anything else. He can't see that it's another human there. He can't see that it's someone he cares about, someone he loves, someone he conversates with, um, because he's just overtook by emotion and rage and just the senses that he feels. And this becomes even more heightened because in the story, the old man ends up, hearing that someone may be in his room, and his heartbeat grows louder and louder because obviously he's scared. And this only increases the amount of anger that the main character has, and it almost plays into what allows him to do the act, because it stimulates him and it gets his adrenaline pumping to where finally he ends up doing the act, and he yells, and then he basically suffocates the old man. And it felt like almost like the heartbeats, although it's unfortunate for the old man, and that's just a natural thing that happens, is you're scared, your heartbeat increases. It's also what was his downfall, because it really just pumped the main character up to do the deed. And passage number 5 is, but for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the walls. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. The old man, stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. Again, seems very not concerned with the old man, very desensitized or insensitive to what just happened, and the fact that someone just lost their life. He is more concerned with how he felt about the eye and how his emotions were, and how it is such a relief for him because this eye is gone and he's not going to be troubled by it anymore and its evil look. This will carry on into passage 6, is when before this passage, police officers show up because they had gotten a complaint that there was a scream the night before, so they're coming to check that everything's okay. The main character had, to put it in light terms, dismembered the body and put it under the floor, and then covered the planks to where no human eye would see it. And the main character was very, very, very confident, and because of this adrenaline, was feeling cocky and very confident that I just did this and no one's ever going to find out, and I'm so much smarter than everyone else because no one's ever going to see it. And these police officers are coming in and standing right above the spot. And he ends up actually leading them and placing a chair above the exact spot that is cut from the floor where the old man's body is, because he is so confident about the fact that he is getting away with this. However, as this passage says, it grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard? Not Almighty God. No, no. They heard. They suspected. They knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think, but anything better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die, and now again, hark, louder, 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 louder. Villains, I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, here. It is the beating of his hideous heart. So as I stated in the beginning, how his oversensitivity to, I guess, sounds, obviously the man's heart, the old man's heart is not beating, but it's interesting to see this carryover of how the main character talks about, I'm not insane and it's not madness. I'm just very calculated and smart in what I'm doing. But in the end, he's the one who gives himself up, because clearly, there is a play of insanity going on here. He is not, sane or right in the head, clearly. And he complains how he's just hearing this ticking, and then he relates that ticking of the watch to actually being the old man's heart, and it's haunting him even right after he just did it. So that's basically the Telltale Heart and my little bit of analysis on it. And I'm relating this to how does this relate to what we're covering in class and what text can be connected to Poe's. Basically, I want to connect it a bit to Nathaniel Hawthorne's, because although they seem to be very different, because Poe is more, you have to really dig to figure out, is there a moral of the story? What's the main theme? What can be learned here? Versus Nathaniel Hawthorne's, who is maybe not extremely like blatant from the beginning, but you can pretty much pick apart and figure out, what the moral of the story is. And it seems that although they're very different, both of them kind of tackle a sense and theme of morality. I've noticed Hawthorne speaks a lot how, this internalized morality, and like in Young Goodman Brown, how he believed this thing and blindly believed faith all through his life. And, now everything that he knew is basically ripped upon him in this sort of dream he had. And it's basically where he's, to relate it a bit to Emerson. Emerson talks about how, you shouldn't just lead blindly into faith and believe everything that someone says and just go by it because that's what someone else said and they have a like high status in society. And Hawthorne is showing that by saying, this main character, blindly followed his faith, didn't really question anything, just listened to what other people said, repeated what other people said, and called himself, very religious and faithful. But obviously, he's not if he's going to talk to the devil. And he realizes this when almost every member of his community who were very religious and high respected people of the community are also there to contribute to a ceremony of the devil. So this falls with Poe because Poe also speaks a bit about morality, especially with the Telltale Heart, of how, what morals do you have to where you can like someone, enjoy their presence, even love someone, and still do harm upon them. So I don't know, I guess that's just a bit of food for thought. And sorry, my presentation was probably very long, but I felt like there was a lot that needed to be said and a lot of things to dissect. I didn't even dissect that much that I was going to because my presentation is very long already. So thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions, let me know. And I appreciate you listening. Thank you.